Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor in his office. So I posted on my community tab, I don't edit, so I'm just gonna leave that in there, the community tab of YouTube. Smash the like bucket and say in the comments how you pronounce community tab. Down in the community tab, I posted a poll. And so this is the thing, I talk about this a lot on the channel. Between 2002 and 2018, I didn't pay any attention to music, or barely any attention to new music. So because of that, I missed a lot of the new rock bands. I was sort of becoming one of those old men who thinks that rock and roll is dead and it was good when I was younger, etc. So two albums came out recently by bands that I am vaguely aware of, bands that I had heard of while I was being Rip Van Winkle, while I was asleep. The War on Drugs and Parquet Courts. And with 54% of the vote, Parquet Courts and their album Sympathy for Life won. Now, I may end up reviewing The War on Drugs as well, I don't know, but this is a nice chance for me to interact with Parquet Courts, which frankly, after listening to both of them, I like this one a lot more than The War on Drugs. This is the first album I've ever listened to by them, the first songs I've ever heard by them, so it's interesting to me. And I always like to know this if I ask you, the listener, if you are a Parquet Courts fan, what do you think? Like, is this actually a typical album? Is this very different? Is this a good representation of their art? I will say I truly enjoyed this album. I enjoyed it a lot. I like how it's guitar-based, how it uses a little bit of technological help, a little bit of synthesizers, but not too much. It has a nice sort of simultaneous lo-fi and hi-fi feel. It's kind of rough and sweet. It's nicely melodic. I think the most obvious comparison to make, and I imagine it's what everybody is saying, is that it's very similar to the Talking Heads. But I don't think it's similar to the Talking Heads necessarily in the way that it sounds, although it is a little bit there. I'd say it's more in the approach. First of all, I need to just say something I've never said on this channel before. When I was growing up, it was a weird time. The 80s was a weird time. So I didn't know growing up. I thought that Prince, Madonna, Wham, Talking Heads, Dire Straits, Culture Club, I thought they were all just pop music. I had no idea that, as an example, Dire Straits was a serious rock band, or that Talking Heads were avant-garde post-punk geniuses. To me, they were so ubiquitous that I never actually focused on them as being that avant-garde, which I think is the correct way to approach the Talking Heads. That's what makes them so great. Of course they're avant-garde. Of course they broke the rules and they integrated world music and they integrated funk and they integrated all these great artistic modes, all these great musical notes into one challenging, interesting, idiosyncratic band. But I'd say in a similar way, you could listen to Parquet Courts, you could listen to this album, and just enjoy it. It doesn't have to be as smart as it is, but it is quite smart. It is surprisingly funky for a band that I was expecting to be, one of these good rock bands of the last 10 years. I was really much more groove-oriented than I expected it to be. Almost every song is just, as opposed to being a standard sort of melodic verse-chorus situation, is really just setting a groove and then playing within that. What's great is when you read the credits, all the members of the band are credited as having written the songs, and I think that shows off in the music, that it's not just a project of one person who has some studio musicians behind them. It feels like a band, a real band where the members matter. And that's what I always say, like why is Radiohead my favorite band right now? Or why have they been my favorite band for the past 20 years? They're one of those bands where the members really matter. And you really get that sense with Parquet Courts. Lyrically, for the most part, the lyrics are kind of buried in the production. Like the first time I listened to it, I didn't really pick up any of the lyrics. It was just sort of part of the sound bed, right? Speaking of sound bed, I'm in my office. I can't control the heating in the building, so I apologize for the hiss above me. That's just going to be here when I record in my office during the winter. I live in Western New York, so there's lots of ambient noise there. It's avant-garde. So the lyrics are kind of buried on this album, which is probably good because they're really on the nose of the moment lyrics. This very much feels like a COVID album. It feels like a Black Lives Matter album. It feels like a 2021 What is Technology album. Trump is not mentioned, but he's at the outskirts of a lot of the things here. I think it's interesting that both Black Lives Matter and COVID have become somehow like proxy battles to fight in the culture war, where we don't have to mention Trump, but we can clearly be against Trumpism by how we present ourselves on those two issues. More on that later. But you know, why not? Why not have these on-the-nose lyrics? I don't know anything about these guys. I guess they're from New York City. But you know, if you're lucky enough to avoid oppression, if you're lucky enough to avoid self-destruction, then what else are you going to sing about? Okay, you can sing about love and your own personal life. You can sing about, I don't know, Buddha, okay? But why not make these kinds of cultural observations that are throughout this album? I will throw one major caveat onto this album. There are two ways I listened to it. One way, the album was good. The other way, the album was awesome. This is an inversion. Usually, music these days is better on your headphones. It's constructed in a computer, it's made on headphones, so it's better in headphones. Not this album. This album is better played loud. The reason I'm recording in my office so often is that they're redoing my kitchen, right? Or I'm having my kitchen redone. And so there's a lot of noise going on there during the day, so I can't record then. So we're doing everything, we're cooking everything in the basement right now. So like our kitchen is now located in a laundry room. It's kind of a funny situation. So we're sort of like hanging out in the basement in this hovel, and I have this little Bluetooth speaker. And yesterday, while my wife was heating up some frozen eel to put on rice with frozen peas, that's what we had for dinner. It's actually quite good. You know, while we're doing this, while we're putting all these things together, I just have this speaker, and I just keep turning this album up, and it just gets better and better. The more it fills my basement, the more I can hear the sounds, the more the groove infects me, and I'm sitting there and I'm doing little goofy dad dances in front of my daughter, you know? Like, it's that kind of vibe. It's that kind of music. So for that reason alone, I really praise this album. We need more music that fills rooms, less music that fills brains. Let me give you an example of the album with a stamp. This is my example song from the album. It's called Just Shadows. I think it's the best song on the album in a lot of ways, but it's also exemplary of what makes it good. I'll include a link to it up there in case you want to go listen to it yourself. Very guitar-led. These guitars go up, they go down, they're very kind of cool. The singing goes along with the guitar, one of the guitar notes. Just all these layers. Reminds me of Talking Heads, also reminds me of Television. The whole album has this sort of late 70s, early 80s feel, which is realistically one of the best parts of all music. You know, that point where punk was over and new wave hadn't yet started, and the first post-punk artists were helping to forge that connection between punk and new wave, and eventually between punk and techno. That kind of bizarre, unexpected connection. I really enjoy the way that the voice goes along with the guitar here and the layers that are behind. And then it breaks into this chorus, which is just kind of this sweet and lo-fi chorus, which actually reminds me a lot of a Kinks chorus. You know, like not one of their better choruses, but just sort of a standard good Kinks chorus. Some of the best lyrics on the album are in this chorus. Suddenly I'm alone in the truest sense of the word, with nothing else here to watch, just shadows, like an inmate who has finished his turn. One of the best moments on the album is when this breaks out of it. Like, so as that chorus ends, this very simple, clear guitar line comes out. And it's not quite a solo. All the way throughout this album, there are solos that aren't quite solos. They're very melodic. They feel very intentional. They're blistering guitar melodies, not so much guitar solos. Now, those lyrics are good. The rest of the lyrics, the reason why I think this is a good representation of the album, are not quite as subtle as the chorus. Amazon fire, 20% off. Global cost, vast species death, suggested for you. Curated life agrees with me. Programmed to know when I should sleep and when to wake up. Preferences set authorizing. Life is not as modern as it seems. Can't pick who you love. This kind of modern life malaise, this sort of algorithm blues, it's okay. But it's good that it's not super out front. That we can just have these lyrics there if we want to engage with them. But if not, we can just do some kind of weird version of a kind of Cosby robot. Unfortunately, my biggest inspiration for dancing is Bill Cosby and James Brown. And Mick Jagger. Those are my three favorite dancers. So whenever I dance like a combination of those three. This is a great song for that kind of dancing. It's a great groove. The lyrics, they're fine, but they're a little bit on the nose. I'll go through the rest of the album a little bit quicker. Walking at a Downtown Pace is the opening track. Just great drumming on here. It's like a drum loop, but it's actually played by the drummer the whole way through. Very good guitar lines over it and very strong bass. You know, just right up front, we have this establishment of the groove. And it's a thing that the Talking Heads did that they do, that Parquet Courts does, which is like using funk without ever really like being funky. It's hard to say, but it doesn't feel like they're like when you listen to like Blue Eyed Soul, when you hear David Bowie trying to sing soul music, he's trying to do what soul musicians are doing. He's doing it. When you hear the Talking Heads or Parquet Courts create these grooves or create this funk, there's this weird sort of, I don't know if it's New York or intellectual abstraction where it doesn't feel like it's trying to co-opt funk. It is just sort of like adjacent to funk, doing similar things but not the same. This is a very on-the-nose COVID song. I'm making plans, all of this, for when this is through. Return the smile of an unmasked friend. Again, why not? Why not have these songs? I really enjoy the very minimal, grimy kind of chorus where he talks about finding a reason to exist. It's like yelling and chanting sort of at the same time. There is a sense of release. All the way throughout this album, there aren't many choruses, and often when they are, there's a long lead up. There's 2 verses, 3 verses leading up to them, and this is a good example to this, I found a reason to exist, which is an important thing to emphasize now, seeing as so many people have ceased to exist. And then it just jams out at the end. This great instrumental break, a truly great instrumental break, and then coming back with the chorus. Black Widow Spider. So whenever I talk about, this is okay, the side note. Whenever I talk about Impressionism is my least favorite thing about Impressionism. I like pre-Impressionism and post-Impressionism much more. They're much more interesting. Punk is interesting, but I find pre-punk and post-punk to be the most interesting, because it's sort of like, how did we arrive at this dissolution of traditional musical values that are somehow a little bit too traditional, which would then be broken down into the post-punk. So I find either side of that. So this doesn't feel like post-punk, this feels like pre-punk. This feels like a Stooges song, a kind of Stooges-style guitar line, blaring and blasting. I would say the Kinks fit firmly in that mode of the pre-punk era, and that's what we have in the music here. It even reminds me, maybe it's just because it's about a spider, it reminds me a little bit of John Entwistle's song by The Who, Boris the Spider, which is a charming and terrible song, or a terribly charming song. I love it, but the lyrics here are about, it's a breakup song, maybe a divorce song about like a woman being a black spider, a little bit pedestrian there. Great build-up to the chorus again, and all the way throughout, there are these great kind of like dinky keyboard sounds happening in the background, adding texture to this kind of straightforward Stooges-esque jam. Then we get to Marathon of Anger, which is mostly based on bleeps and bloops. By that I mean computer-generated sounds on somewhat automated sounds. Beep, boop, boop, boop. But I love the way it sounds. I love the way he sings. He sings almost like a krautrock singer, but then the guitar's kind of like a surf guitar, and the drums kind of remind me of Kid A drums from Radiohead, all these great layers. And the vocal production in general reminds me of Talking Heads at their best. It's very funky, it's very cool, has this great atmosphere. It also reminds me, at times, the way it's sung, the way the approach reminds me some of Brian Eno as well. But then we get to the lyrics where it seems to be about Black Lives Matter. And this is the thing. I participated in Black Lives Matter protests. I still have the sign on my front yard because it is still an issue. It turns out the New York Times is going to be releasing an article about my hometown, about the racism in the school system. I'll be talking about that on my other channel if you want to ever check that out. Spoiler, I'm very happy that they're doing that. But like with this and with Lana Del Rey last week making reference to Black Lives Matter, we are running this risk of turning the Black Lives Matter into a moment like COVID, to where it becomes like a marker for white people to remember what things were like, as opposed to a movement to ensure the continued existence of our human brothers. You know what I mean? Like when we sort of talk or sort of eulogize this movement, which is not over, the moment is not over, right? We're 1 second away from from everyone putting their signs back out again, right? Whatever this existential threat to African Americans is, it is not resolved. But when we have songs like this, especially compared with the first song, I'm going to go out and say it's unintentionally racist to use Black Lives Matter as a signifier of where we were, like Woodstock, okay? Or Kennedy being shot. Hell, that's a better example, because Kennedy being shot, for the most part, for baby boomers, has just become like a symbol of like where they were and their loss of innocence. When we're not thinking about some dude who has his dome blown out the back of his head, right? There's a real death in the Kennedy assassination. There's real death in the Black Lives Matter movement. So let's be careful, I would say, fellow white people, let's be careful not to just use it as a way to wonder years and describe the past. Then we get the song Just Shadows, which I've already described, and then Plant Life, which was almost my stamp because it is the most far out song. It feels like a Herbie Hancock song, just totally groove-based, and in that way it has that David Byrne's ability to appropriate other cultures' music without feeling like what we describe as cultural appropriation. It's a delicate dance that Byrne does, and I'd say it's a delicate dance that Parquet Courts does. This is the best song to dance around in my basement while waiting to eat frozen eel. If you have a local Asian market, go get some eel and defrost it. It's very good. It's a long song. It's like 6 minutes. And according to him, I read a little interview with him about the song. It's about rediscovering his passion for music through New York City dance floors. And it has that, maybe that's what David Byrne's able to do, where his appropriation of other cultures doesn't feel so much like appropriation as it does a sort of anthropological exercise, which sounds like a real insult. But with songs like this, I think it really works. Applications Apparatus feels a lot more like Devo or like Kraftwerk, maybe even Daft Punk. It's much more on that, the post-punk, the interregnum between punk and new wave. We really feel that's where this song belongs. It builds really nicely to an instrumental break, and there's like a release, because it's mostly spoken word, then there's a release. It's not quite a chorus, but it's a different kind of verse. The whole song is another song about technophobia or techno-weariness. This one, again, I wonder if it's not patronizing or if it's useful. I can't tell. History will tell me, not me. Or history will tell you. I won't tell you. But it's about the loneliness of an Uber driver and the way that the Uber driver feels connected and somehow in a loving relationship with the GPS system that's talking to him. It's a little preachy, right? If you haven't actually lived that experience, it's maybe mythologizing the loneliness of the working poor as opposed to trying to do something about it. But I don't know. Maybe it's actually highlighting something that we don't think about, and maybe this is a necessary step towards humanizing and helping the working poor who drive us around all over the place. I do like the line, charging cable offered as a sign of peace. Just because, is there anything better than getting into an Uber with a charging cord? It's like the greatest feeling. Because like at least for me, I don't use them every day. I only use them when I travel. I always need that cord. Homo Sapien, a great clean, that post-punk feeling, just 2 chords, very Stooges, but the bass is really jacked on this, which I really like here. It even has like kind of Stooges style claps, like on their first album, like No Fun. Like you know how they got the claps going in No Fun? This, I don't know. I assume that the producer, I swear to God, his name is not Ronald McDonald, but it's something McDonald, and the first name is like, you can tell me in the comments, and I apologize. Hey, my name is Sky. People have been making fun of me my whole life for my name. So I am not going to make fun of you for your name reminding me of Ronald McDonald. I just don't remember what it actually is. I imagine that Mr. McDonald said that intentionally made this to sound a little bit like that first Stooges album with these claps. I do like how it slightly complicates with the second verse. Because the second verse, there's like this cool kind of guitar note that gets a little bit deeper as it goes along. This has one of the few choruses on the album, which I really like. Straight up and down, speak intelligently. And it's yet another meditation on the nature of technology and the way that our technology has dehumanized us or post-humanized us. Very on the nose. I like it in the chorus because it's talking about Homo sapiens as a species and where we come and where we're going. Cotton Eye Joe. Sorry, I have to say Cotton Eye. dislike and unsubscribe. But you can't say, where did you come from, where did you go, without saying Cotton Eye Joe. This is why people say I need to edit my videos. I'm scratching my face, I'm chewing my cheek, and I'm quoting Cotton Eye Joe while trying to talk about this great album by Parquet Courts, Reset Sky. So I like the chorus, how it's talking about the nature of Homo sapiens in general as what makes us different from other species is we stand up and down and we speak intelligently. I like the supposition that we're in some ways de-evolving, going back to Devo perhaps, with the idea that all of how much further we've gone beyond that is in some way a regression. What a time to be alive, a TV set in the fridge, a voice that recites the news and leaves out the gloomy bits, a god for the modern soul with even paternal speech. So the idea of a TV set in the fridge and this kind of alienation from technology and what really is a Homo sapien. I have to get that song out of my head now. God, I joke. The next song, Sympathy for Life, despite being the title track, is probably my least favorite on the album. I like the drum intro. I like the guitar work, kind of alternating between quick strums and long strums, and the guitar is super high in the mix. And I like the high vocals, the double vocals that are very nice here, kind of like a screaming one and more of a talking one. And it's a nice groove. It actually reminded me a fair amount, not of an old band, but of a newer band, Chicano Batman. I don't know if there's any connection between Parquet Courts and Chicano Batman, but I think this would I think if you played these on a mix next to each other, they'd feel very similar. Zoom Out is like a full funk groove with like a funky bass, and it's really based on riffs. And this is maybe one of the things that's good and bad about this album, is a lot of this album feels like people just get together and jam and come up with a riff and then make a song around it, which arguably is not how you write songs. You're supposed to sit at home with a piano or a guitar and structure and create these things. The problem with that is it's hard to write good grooves if you don't start with the groove. Much of this album feels like it starts with the groove. And it really is just funky in that Talking Heads funky way. I like the way he's singing slightly off key. There's this weird sort of banjo sound that's kind of poorly plucked. At times it even reminds me a little bit of kind of like a 60s song. I have a hard time sort of defining that. There's even another point on Plant Life where it reminded me a little bit of the Doors. There's like this weird sort of vestigial 60s hippie sound. And the guitar work that's often very Neil Young-ish, even Jerry Garcia-ish at times. Like there's this weird sort of like vestigial hippiness that just sprinkles a little bit of its patchouli dust on the music. I don't know. At least that's what I hear. When you zoom out, together is now. Earth is shut down and space is so passé. More of these kind of on the nose lyrics. Chulo is cool because it takes that electronic banjo or that weird banjo, distorted banjo. I don't know what it is. It takes that banjo sound and continues it. The bass kind of wanders into the frame. The whole song begins and it feels like everyone's just kind of like walking into the studio and then snaps into focus. Gets super funky, especially after the second verse. Great instrumental breaks. All the way throughout this album, great instrumental breaks. The whole thing's about, I guess, a trulo, which is a kind of a hut. I'd like look. It only has like one eye, so like staring out of a glass eye. It seems to be about the limited vision that we have now. Then Pulcinella, a kind of slow song to end, sings a little bit off key again as well. Really nice dynamics with this, like basically gentle verse, strong verse, gentle verse, strong verse. It's all in relationship to the character of Pulcinella, who features minorly in one of Moliere's great plays, Le Malade Imaginaire. He's in one of the interludes. That's why that was back there. You get a gold star if you pick that one up. It's interesting, part of what I imagine might turn people off to this is its sort of snootiness and its pretentiousness, right? I mean, Pulcinella is a character from the Commedia dell'arte, the traveling Italian theater troops. He plays this kind of fake, hedonistic person. If you've ever seen a puppet show with like Punch and Judy, this is Punch, this is who we're talking about. So taking on this character and using it's good, and I like it. It's more interesting than a Harlequin or whatever, or Figaro, right? Not Figaro. What's the Scaramouche? It's more interesting than Scaramouche, right? I feel like we've done enough of that in our culture. But it does maybe give you a little bit of that kind of intellectual distance of like having to know what pulcinella is and then how that relates to what they're singing. It does have my favorite lyrics to the entire album though in this song. Because the mind wanders home like a cat does when it knows it is time to feed again. That's a good description of the character and of sort of where we are as a society and a culture. Like we wander, but we know when we need to be fed. A nice guitar solo, a nice melodic Neil Youngish strong guitar solo to end. So there's my review. There's my review of Parquet Courts and their album Sympathy for Life. An enjoyable, on-the-nose, funky, smart album. And could you please tell me in the comments if that hissing is so bad that it's not even worth listening to this video? Because I can't tell. I'm weirdly like self-conscious when it comes to the sound on this channel because I just record with my iPhone, so I know it could be better. I think my wife is getting me a lavalier for Christmas, so hang tight, everybody. All right, until next time, there's the camera.